you've ever heard of. Throw me some names, Jim.
It's the New York Times Magazine, the New York Times, Marie Claire.
Marie Claire. I'm definitely setting myself up as the dumbed down person here, right? New York Times, no. Marie Claire, yes. Yes. Cosmo, thank you. Now you know how I found out about him. But Jim did research for his book on post-traumatic growth, and he did interview these scientists, but also a lot of people whose stories really exemplify. So I would love to invite Jim onto the stage to tell you more.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed the conference. It's been a great experience and really great presentation. So like Louis said, I'm a freelance writer, an author, and journalist. So I come to this from a different perspective. I'm not a clinician or a researcher, but I've spoken to lots of clinicians and researchers and lots of trauma survivors. And wanted to talk to you today a little bit about post-traumatic growth. So here's a little overview of what we're going to do. What is post-traumatic growth, and then kind of dig into it a little bit, looking at some of the common processes that people go through, looking at changes in narrative, how religious people grow is a little bit different maybe than some other folks, and there tends to be a lot of post-traumatic growth reported among people with a religious background. A program that I've done some reporting on that I think does a fantastic job of helping to promote post-traumatic growth, and trauma and happiness, which is not something you usually hear about. So hopefully we'll see how that goes. So no DNA charts. We're starting with Batman. So this is the original 1939 first Batman comic. And I start with this because it's a really succinct story of post-traumatic growth. We all know the story of Bruce Wayne. Sees his parents murdered right in front of him, and that changes him. So, you know, in this comic, they give us a day, in which, a few days in which for him, that he undergoes this change. And a few days later, we see him kneeling in his bed, and he says, "I swear by the spirits of my parents to avenge their deaths by spending the rest of my life warring on all criminals." It's an interesting response. He doesn't say that he wants to war on the criminals that killed his parents. Instead, he wants to go after all criminals. And that, in a nutshell, is growth. He's had this traumatic experience. He retreats to mull it over, and then he transforms himself. If you look at the original comic, he becomes an athlete, he becomes a scientist, he becomes a bat. All so that he can help keep his community safe. What he wants to do is to go after all criminals so that nobody else suffers the way he suffered. And we see examples of post-traumatic growth like this in culture everywhere. You see it in comic books, in movies, in mythology, in all kinds of stories. Unfortunately, for a very long time, we didn't really see it in psychology. So, you know, stories of soldiers suffering in the aftermath of trauma go back thousands of years. You can read it in ancient Greek stories, and I'm sure it predates that. But psychology didn't recognize that kind of trauma and that kind of change until 1980, when it wound up in the DSM, mostly due to a lot of agitation from Vietnam veterans. And when it did start being studied, examined, and have people working to address it, the field took a fairly one-dimensional view. Trauma was bad for you, and so it was a bad event, and it led to a negative outcome, and we want to fix the negative outcome to make you better and to kind of alleviate that suffering and get you back to normal and send you on your way. And there were, at the same time, a few psychologists that looked a little deeper and looked a little further at what was going on and started to develop a view that was a little maybe more rounded in terms of that experience. So in late 70s, POWs came back from Vietnam that had been held at the Hanoi Hilton, and they had been beaten, tortured, held in solitary confinement, really just horrific conditions for years and years and years. William Sledge was a young Navy psychiatrist at the time, and he was assigned to work with those men. And when he talked with them, he kind of couldn't believe what he was hearing, because yes, they said this was a horrific experience, and yes, it was traumatizing, but over and over they kept saying that they had benefited from this experience, that they were changed, that that experience made them better people. He kind of couldn't believe it. He thought this was really strange, so he wanted to study it. He got some funding. He started, asking questions and just studying on this group. And what he found was that 61% of those POWs reported positive changes as a result, a direct result of their experience of Vietnam, being held as captives. Those held the longest and treated the worst did the best. They reported the most growth. They were more optimistic. They had more insight into themselves. They did a better job of identifying what mattered to them, what was important in life. They had increased understanding, empathy, patience. It was a very transformative experience for them. So when Sledge, published a study and he was presenting at a big conference, and all his colleagues thought, "Wow, this is a blockbuster study. Everybody's going to want to hear about this." They booked him a much bigger room than this. He came out on the stage to present his study, and nobody was there. So there were about 10 or 12 people in the room, and most of them were veterans. Nobody in the field wanted to hear about it. It pushed completely against the grain of how the field thought about trauma and what it meant. And he went on to study other things and kind of dropped it. And we might not really know much about his work were it not for Rich Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun. They are two professors at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and they wanted to learn about wisdom. Back again in the early 80s, they started talking to older people to learn about wisdom, and back then, as today, older people usually means women because we men die first, and that leaves the women to talk with. So when they talk to these women, they expressed, a lot of sadness about the loss of their husbands. It was a terrible event. But they also kept saying over and over that they benefited from that experience, that they realized that they were much stronger than they thought. They became much more independent than they had ever been in their lives. They, some of them learned to drive for the first time. They developed better relationships with their kids and new friends. And there was this sort of whole new life that they had in the wake of this traumatic loss of their husbands. And so they thought, this is very different than we thought we would be hearing. So they began to talk to more and more people who had survived different kinds of trauma. And over time, they kind of put all that information together and came up with these sort of 5 kind of commonalities that they were seeing when people changed as a result of trauma. They had increased inner strength, openness to new possibilities, deeper relationships with other people, enhanced appreciation for life, and a stronger sense of spirituality. They found that between 50% and 65% of trauma survivors experience post-traumatic growth. It's incredibly common. It's more common than PTSD. I don't necessarily like that comparison because it's not either or. It's often a both. But we do see post-traumatic growth being very common. Rich Tedeschi talks about trauma and growth in, I think, an interesting way. It's a great metaphor. He calls trauma a seismic event. So if you think of a person as a building, trauma is like an earthquake, and it comes and it flattens your building. And when your building's flattened, you've got some choices, right? You can kind of hide under the rubble and sort of pretend nothing's wrong. You can rebuild the same house you had, and that's probably seems like a safe choice, right? I live in this house, I know how everything works, I know where the bathroom is and the kitchen and all that. Or you can say, you know what, that house got knocked down. Maybe it wasn't the best house to begin with, and I can build a better house. I can build a new house. And that's one way to think about growth. It's building a different house after your house got destroyed by this traumatic earthquake. So when people grow, there are a lot of different paths to growth that I've found in my reporting, and a lot of different sort of mechanisms and things involved. But one thing that seems to be fairly common is this idea of narrative. So we're going to talk a little bit about how narratives work. I'll introduce you to some folks and give you a better idea of kind of where that fits in with trauma and change. So this is Shane Mullins. Shane grew up in a small town outside of Galway in Ireland. He was, I say, was a typical teenager. He dropped out of high school. was never very good at school. He worked as a bricklayer. He worked on his family farm. Like a lot of kids his age in Ireland, he liked to drink a lot. So one afternoon he was out at a party. He got pretty drunk. He went out drinking some more. He wound up at the pub. He drank there. Eventually got thrown out of the pub. He was driving home and got about 200 or 300 yards before he rolled his car. And when his car rolled, it rolled right over onto a stone pillar. The pillar went through the roof of the car right into his head, and he was in a coma. When his parents got to the hospital, the doctor said they should think about donating his organs. He was in very bad shape. So Shane was partially paralyzed when he came to. He had terrible balance, the brain injury affected his language. He often wouldn't know what he was going to say when it would come out of his mouth. He spent a few months in rehab, got a little bit better, was able to come home, and like most of us, wanted to just get back to his regular life. And he started socializing, he'd go out and drink. When he had a pint, he would fall down on the ground. He had no balance whatsoever. He kept going out, kept drinking, kept getting frustrated with the situation. People in his town would treat him as if he was disabled, which just made him more bitter. He got very depressed. He was hospitalized several times after contemplating suicide. And eventually he just came to a point where he realized he had to stop drinking. At least if he could do that, maybe something else in his life would come together. So he went to an inpatient facility for people with traumatic brain injury, and while he was there, he stopped drinking. He began to see a therapist. The first 4 or 5 sessions, he didn't say a word. The whole idea of talking to a therapist was crazy to him. But he kept going, and eventually started talking and kind of opened up. And he began to realize that he couldn't live the life he had. That was gone. And it was just clear that physically he couldn't do it. He couldn't work on a farm because he had no balance. And if he fell into a piece of farm machinery, he would be severely injured. He couldn't work on a construction site without proper balance. He couldn't drink. He couldn't socialize the way he had. His whole social universe was sort of taken from him. And he had to think of something else to do with himself. So he came home. He sat down and talked with his mom and said, I want to go to college. And they both laughed a lot because that was kind of ridiculous. He couldn't even make it through high school. But he did find a local technical school that would take him. He took a communications class, and he put together this presentation, very good kind of PowerPoint, probably better than this, about how he kind of remade himself, reinvented himself, the kinds of things that he did that helped him to get from step to step to step, the kinds of things that inspired him and kept him going. And he gave it in his class, and he gave it a few other classes at the school, and he gave it to a few other schools. He now travels around the UK giving this presentation about himself. And I found it fascinating to watch because in a way, it's not just a presentation, it's an inspiring thing to see, but it's really a way of him reintroducing himself to the world, saying, this is who I am now. This is the person I've reimagined myself to be. And it's hard, it's not easy for him. He still struggles with depression. His family is not, always supportive because they don't really fully understand what he's gone through and why he has to be this different person. There's a lot of struggle. For Shane, when he struggles, this is where he turns to. He loves the movie Braveheart. And whenever things kind of get down, he puts on that big speech that William Wallace gives. So if you're familiar with the movie, William Wallace was a Scotsman who had a horrible, experience living under the English and was, tortured and went through all this trauma and rose up to be a great leader of the Scots to fight against the English. And he gives this great inspirational speech before they go into battle where they're outmatched like 100-1 or something. And for Shane, this story of William Wallace was what was his roadmap. He saw this guy who did just sort of the unimaginable. And he was able to do that because of the trauma that he survived. And so William Wallace, for him, was the model. And that's really important. For people who have been through trauma, a model can kind of provide an opening, can show people that there is a place that you can move forward to, that there's some opportunity for positive change. This is a study done 2004, the researcher interviewed 74 breast cancer survivors and found that those women that knew a cancer survivor who had grown from their experience were much more likely to report post-traumatic growth and reported much greater post-traumatic growth than those who didn't know someone who had benefited. So just knowing somebody is a big help. And I talked to the researcher who did the study, and from her perspective and her experience, she's also a trauma survivor, it doesn't have to be a person. It can be a work of art. It can be a movie or a story or a myth, really anything that imparts that idea that from this struggle there can be some benefit, some change, can be very powerful and very empowering for somebody who is going through a traumatic experience. So I want to talk a little bit about religion and sort of within a religious context, how people deal with trauma. Because I think for people who are religious, it can be, it's slightly different, but it's a similar kind of upsetting of your worldview and your way you understand the universe. So I'll talk to you a little about Tina Cherry and her son, Lewis Brown. So this is Lewis. He grew up in Dorchester, Massachusetts in the 1990s. He loved to read. He loved to read so much he put together his own library at home of his own favorite books. He wanted to go to college. He wanted to study aerospace engineering. He was pretty sure he was going to be president. He was a pretty remarkable young man, though maybe not the most popular guy in school. So, and Lewis, one of the things that bothered him was his neighborhood, where he lived in Dorchester at the time. It was a very violent neighborhood. There were a lot of street drug dealing, a lot of gun violence. He was very frustrated by the stereotype of young black men at the time, and continuing certainly, and wanted to do something to change that. He joined a group called Teens Against Gang Violence and got very involved and was helping to try to improve some of these issues in his community. One afternoon, he went out to a Christmas party for this organization. He was walking down the street near his house. A block away, a bunch of young men had an argument and pulled out their guns and started shooting. And a stray bullet hit Lewis in the head, and he died in the hospital shortly thereafter. His mother, Tina, was destroyed. She was a very religious woman. She'd grown up in Honduras. She had been going to church since she was good luck. She had always read the Bible. She prayed. She went to church. She gave to the church. She volunteered. She was, a kind of model religious person. And for her, she just couldn't understand, given her faith, how this could happen, how God could let her son die like this. And she was very angry. She was very bitter. She wanted to just crawl in her room and close the curtains and just kind of let it go. But she had 2 other children. And so she turned back to her priest because he was someone she was very close to and respected, and started talking with him and had a lot of very angry conversations with him. She started reading. He suggested some books. She read some self-help books. She read the Bible. She went through this very interesting process of pushing back against her faith, but also kind of searching to try to understand what it is that she was going through. Religion, so when we look at stories of post-traumatic growth, I mean, religion is certainly one area we can look, and for stories that help people think about their suffering. So, most of the world's religion have stories about trauma and change. The story of Buddha, for example, Buddha grew up in a sort of palace grounds, and his father never let him see old people or sick people or dying people. He only had this view of the world as a kind of young, flourishing place, and one day he convinced the chariot driver to take him into town, and he went into town and he saw an old person and a sick person, and then he saw a dead person, and he, was shocked, and he had no idea, and was essentially traumatized by the realization that all of these things befall us all, and that he too will be old and sick and dead eventually. And then he sees a holy man who is happy but has no possessions, and decides, that I will follow that path. I will seek enlightenment, and essentially that trauma pushes him to seek enlightenment or spiritual growth. Jesus' story, on one level, assures Christians that they don't suffer alone, that God suffers too, and Jesus' story is certainly one of trauma and suffering and transformation. Even the story of Job, which is kind of a bummer, right? Not a lot of good stuff happens to Job, but even that, it's a story in which the most pious person is afflicted with the most pain, and so it draws that kind of connection between the fact that trauma is not a punishment. Trauma is just something that happens. Even the best of us will suffer. And Job, for all his suffering, he also had this relationship with God, right? He gets to talk to God. He gets to argue with God. Other people don't get to do that. So there's some kind of sense of a closeness, even in the kind of torturedness of Job. So there are these stories in religion that kind of connect us a little bit to post-traumatic growth and to the experience of trauma and suffering. There's a psychologist, Ken Parderman, who studies religion and trauma. And one of the things that he looked at is sort of developing a model for how people of faith go through this process. And sort of a two-step. On the sort of beginning is a negative religious coping, right? What Tina went through, this sense of anger and frustration, pushing back against your faith. And that's totally normal. That's what anybody would do. It's sensible. It makes sense. The problem is when people don't move past that and they get stuck in that. Studies show that you see more levels of distress, depression, anxiety, and people are kind of mired in that part of the process. What most often happens is people move on to positive religious coping, right? They're healing some, they're able to get some control over their reaction to the trauma, and ultimately they seek meaning. They try to find some meaning in this experience for themselves, and that often reframes and recontextualizes their sense of faith and spirituality, and that is part of post-traumatic growth. That's one of the sort of 5 domains that Tedeschi outlined is this new, maybe deeper sense of spirituality. So back to Tina, she eventually was able to kind of find a new way, again, much like Shane, to think about herself and what her life could be. She began thinking a lot about Lewis and what his goals were and what was important to him. She worked with the Boston public school system to develop a curriculum based on his life, and they kind of pulled some of his favorite books and they put together a reading list. They talked a lot about his sort of sense of community and the kinds of things he wanted to do around social change, and they put that together and they kind of teach that through the school system in Boston. And she founded the Lewis Brown Peace Institute, and that's an organization that provides support for families who have lost a loved one to gun violence. And so she took her direct experience and is trying to reach out to other people and help people in that same situation. And I love this quote from her. She said, "I need to be able to find a way to channel my grief and pain into something positive, and at the same time help other survivors, mentor those who are going through this." So her experience brought up something for me as a reporter. So when I was working on the story, I had this idea, right, of looking at trauma and trying to understand how this whole thing works. And I get this idea like, okay, there's a traumatic experience and that happens. And then you kind of get better, you heal, and then you grow, and then you're all better, right? And so it seemed to be like this great, neat, linear package. And I kept talking to people like Tina who have been through this process, and it's definitely not what I was hearing from them. I was hearing like, this thing happened, it really sucked, and then I got a little better, and then I got worse, and then I feel like I've grown, but I still struggle all the time. And I was talking with Lawrence Calhoun, one of the original researchers on post-traumatic growth, and he had a great way of describing it. So, I had in my head a sort of trauma meter, right? You're kind of doing terribly, and then it goes up, 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 and eventually you're growing, and you're doing great. That's wrong. So I think I see that. I don't have the PowerPoint skills for that, but I'm not sure. What we really have are 2 separate meters, a meter for growth and a meter for distress. And those meters don't plug into the same place. They've got nothing to do with each other. You can be growing and feeling like you have changed and you're doing all these great things in the world, and you can still be deeply struggling. You can have recurrent post-traumatic stress symptoms. You cannot be sleeping at night, as people often don't, for decades or a lifetime. That these things are not connected, and they bounce all over the place, and that's all okay. That's kind of just how it works. It's not linear, and growth doesn't fix your PTSD. You can have PTSD and grow, and they're not, one doesn't kind of obviate the other, if that makes sense. So I want to talk a little bit about Boulder Crest. So like I said, I'm a reporter. I recently did some reporting on Boulder Crest Retreat, which is a retreat for veterans out in Virginia. So almost all the research on post-traumatic growth is done on people who have grown on their own, right? It just kind of happened. I want to talk to breast cancer survivors and poll them on their post-traumatic growth and whatnot. There are not a lot of programs or even individual therapists that sort of work to help people to grow and come at that from a sort of founding principle. And so in my reporting, I've been looking for places to do this and came across Boulder Crest. They're based out of Virginia. Rich Tedeschi kind of consulted with them and helped them set up their program, as well as a few other folks who are sort of well steeped in post-traumatic growth. They work with men separately from women. They provide a lot of resources for women veterans, which is great because there's not a lot out there. And they expect everyone to grow. They come at it from that perspective. So, when I was there, I went through with a group of women. There were 7 women. It's like a week-long program, and they do 18 months of remote follow-up. These women were remarkable people. They had mostly done several tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Some of them were in a sort of elite program where they served alongside special operations soldiers. They were in combat as much as any man is in combat, even though women don't serve in combat, or didn't when they were going through these programs. They were challenged. They went through a lot of adversities. There was a lot of violence. Some of them were abused and sexually assaulted during their deployments. Yet most of them still said it was the time in their life when they felt like they were doing what they were meant to do. This was important, meaningful work for them. And when they came home, it all fell apart. Women are as likely as men to have PTSD in the military. Women soldiers are more likely to be depressed than men. All soldiers have very high suicide rates. If you look at women veterans between 18 and 29 committed suicide at 6 times the rate of civilian women in that same age group. So there are real struggles and real problems with this group. At Boulder Crest, they have pretty long days. They start at 6:30 in the morning. They do journaling. They do exercise. They have sort of very interesting sessions where they kind of delve into previous traumas, more family and childhood related than military related. In the afternoons, they often do things like archery, kayaking, equine therapy. They look like fun, but there's a lot going on there. They're still reinforcing all of this stuff that they talk about in the morning sessions. They're kind of pushing people to open up and be more vulnerable. And then in the evenings, they all cook dinner together. It's kind of a communal meal. They have a fire to sit around the fire. They do transcendental meditation twice a day, which most of the women found to be very helpful. So the guides, this guy teaches transcendental meditation, by the way, so which is pretty awesome. He's not exactly the typical meditation teacher. He's an Army Ranger, retired Army Ranger. So one of the things they do that seems to work well for them is they get rid of professionals. There's one psychologist on staff. She is the only mental health certified professional in the place. Everybody else is a guide. The guides are mostly veterans, some civilians. They've all been through pretty rough stuff. A lot of them are graduates of this program. And they talk a lot about what they've been through and how they got to where they got and the kinds of things that were helpful for them. There's a lot of sharing of experience and not just kind of, spilling your guts, but pointed sharing. That the idea is that there's a lesson behind the stories that they're telling. This is a woman who works there. She also went through the program. So I'll tell you a little bit about her story just to give you a sense of what what these people are hearing. So this woman was in the Army. She went to Afghanistan. Her superior officer there sexually assaulted her and continued to sexually assault her over the course of several months. It was a situation she could not get out of. Every time she left the base, she hoped she'd get blown up because it was the only way she could figure out how to get out of the situation. She came back from that deployment, signed up for a separate program, wound up working with special operations forces in this kind of highly dangerous situations. Did that deployment, came home, and she wound up on antidepressants and anxiety medication. She had a stroke at age 27. And went through lots of mental health programs with the Army and the VA, and nothing really did anything for her. And she wound up here at Boulder Crest. Part of the reason she shares that story, and others share stories like that, is to let people know it's okay to be vulnerable there. You can talk about things there that you maybe have not told anybody else ever, and it's okay. That people are there just to listen, and it's all right. And another reason she does is sort of that, what we were talking about earlier, modeling and narrative, right? Here is a person who went through these deep, dark struggles, and yet here she is. She is okay. She owns her own business. She comes here and works part-time to help other women like her who are going through the same thing. And so it provides, you know, a little bit of a roadmap and a model and a real sense that maybe I can get there, because she was standing in my shoes 18 months ago. And if she can do that, maybe I can do that too. And there's another exercise they do, I just found fascinating. I thought it was really smart and well done. And all of the women I talked to from this group and other groups who have been through it really found it to be powerful. And it's essentially a kind of, I mean, I forgot what they call it. I call it a trauma family tree. And it's how I tend to think about it. So what they have them do is write down your family, big family tree going back to grandparents or maybe a little bit older, all the way down to you, and if you have kids, down to your kids, aunts and uncles, whoever. And then you write down the traumas that those individuals experienced in their lives that you know about, and then the traumas those people visited on the family, how they reacted and acted and the kinds of ways that they hurt the people in their family that they love. And then they also write down, so all that's in red, and then in blue they write down everything that those people did that was positive for them, the kinds of traits that they portrayed, the kinds of things that they got you interested in, all of the different things that you feel like you benefited from. And one of the reasons they do that is because, you know, if all you write about is the trauma, you're just like the victim at the bottom of the trauma hill, you know, and it all washes down on you. And there's no agency in that. If you start looking at the good things that these people did too and start to see them as flawed people, maybe people that didn't even understand what they were doing because nobody really taught them how to deal with the traumas that came their way, and they just turned around and dumped it on the next person. That somehow it gives these people going through this course more of a sense of their own ability to kind of take control of their own lives and understand that history and all of what Dr. Yehuda was talking about this morning, this sort of family element of trauma, but also knowing that you have a little bit of an ability to change that. You can take control. And then at night around the fire, they burn their trees, and I think that helps. A little fire is always good. So, you know, they talk a lot about childhood abuse at this place, and this is specific, maybe to them, but probably useful for broader use as well, because in the military, there's just a lot of people who have faced childhood abuse. Studies vary a little bit. This is one we found half of women, also half of men in the military reported either childhood sexual abuse or physical abuse. Some studies have a little higher, some a little bit lower, depending on how you define the traumas and the number of traumas. But it's a population that is much higher level of childhood abuse than in the general population. And those people often have much tougher mental health issues. 65% of soldiers who attempted suicide also experienced childhood trauma. So, you know, these people are in a tough spot. So, you know, one of the things that they try to do there is essentially help people to open up, not only for the sense of disclosure, but to give other people an opportunity to help them. You know, this group becomes very much a self-help group. And when I talked to Rich Tedeschi about it, he said when others start helping you, it becomes obvious there's something you can do for other people too. And that's a really important sort of point that they are trying to emphasize in all of these sessions they do. They talk a lot about listening. They talk a lot about how you can reach out to other people. And I saw it, whatever, if somebody's having a hard time with it, another person will step up and help them out. And that sense of community and gratitude is really important. In my own work, when I was interviewing trauma survivors, there's like 19 or 20 in the book, and there's probably another dozen that didn't get into that book, and I've written about people in other contexts. But every time I'm talking with a trauma survivor who has grown, there's a moment that they'll tell me where they realized, my parents gave up all their sick time to come to the hospital and see me every day, or my friends took all their spare time and came here to help me, or the nurses were so remarkable in how they helped me get through this. There's a moment where they go from focusing on their own suffering to realizing that somebody else is sacrificing to help them. And it's this shift in perspective, and it's hard to know when it happens or what's going to trigger it, but everybody I talked to who grew had that shift, and it involved gratitude. And that moment where they started thinking about other people and what other people were doing to help them is the moment that they then wanted to give back and help somebody else. And I think that's part of what they're trying to get to in some of the work that they do at Boulder Crest. So this is a great study by this Italian researcher who looks at a lot of gratitude, and she found that breast cancer survivors who were predisposed to gratitude reported much higher levels of post-traumatic growth and reduced distress and more positive emotions. It helps. So, and here are the group of women that I watched go through this program. When they do their 18 months of follow-up, these women became such an important, close community to each other. They set up a text group, and they text each other constantly, all day long. They're going back and forth. They're supporting each other. They're explaining their problems. They kind of have a lot of understanding of their goals and where they're headed in life and what they want to achieve, and they help each other get there. And they just are really this very tight, kind of remarkable group. And that kind of support is really important. Women in the military are 15%. They're a small minority. They don't have a lot of friends in the military. So, social support is beneficial to help people get through trauma with less distress and to help them grow. There's a study in mothers in New Orleans 5 years after Hurricane Katrina. Those with strong levels of social support had less PTSD. And veterans from the first Gulf War, the single best predictor of post-traumatic growth was social support. Social support is hugely important. And just some of the results from Boulder Crest. This is a relatively new program, and they just sort of started their assessment a little while ago. But PTSD scores down by 41% from what I see in the literature. That's pretty darn good. Anxiety and depression cut in half, and post-traumatic growth scores are up significantly. So trauma and happiness. We'll try to end on an up note, right? So I have a question for everybody. Who do you think is happier? A lottery winner or someone paralyzed in a car accident? So let's see hands for the lottery winner. Who thinks the lottery winner is going to be happier? Anybody rather win the lottery? Right, I'm surprised. I thought it'd be more, but we'll say maybe half, right? So it seems like a pretty straightforward question, but you may have guessed it's not. So this is Shen Hayward. When she was in high school, she was a track star. She was recruited to an elite boarding school in Hawaii where she ran track. She was a great student. She dated the quarterback. She was very popular. She got in a car one day with some friends and had a head-on collision and wound up paralyzed from the waist down. She was taken to the hospital. She was in a coma. The doctors didn't know even if she'd be able to breathe on her own. And when she woke up, she found out she was going to be paralyzed. Let me back up. So she had a very hard time. She viewed herself as an athlete. She was a runner, and her legs had been taken from her. She tried to put her competitive instincts towards her rehab, right? Learning how to dress, learning how to bathe, learning how to get around in a wheelchair. Life became very laborious and complicated. She kind of stuck with it. She managed to actually graduate with her high school class. She didn't miss a year of school. She went to Stanford and studied psychology. She went to Harvard, studied psychology. And she became an advocate for the rights of the disabled. And she got very interested in the research on happiness. And she found a study. There was a very kind of pivotal study that was done decades ago on this very question of lottery winners and people in a wheelchair. And she just she didn't trust it. She thought, this doesn't seem right, this doesn't ring true. That study found what you'd expect, that the lottery winners are much happier than the people who have been paralyzed in an accident. But that study also looked at these people only 1 year after the events took place. And she knew from her own experience, a year after you were paralyzed in a car accident, you're probably still in rehab. You don't even really understand what your life is going to be like. So she recruited her own group. She got 50 people who had been paralyzed in accidents a decade earlier, 50 people who won an average of $6 million. That's a lot of money, right? About a decade earlier, and then 50 people like the rest of us who didn't get anything. And what she found was actually that everybody is pretty happy. All three groups had fairly high levels of happiness and fairly similar levels of happiness. But when she looked at pleasure in daily activities, the people in the wheelchairs, the people who had been paralyzed, were actually happy. They had a higher level of just day-to-day happiness. And when she looked at meaning in their lives and a deeper, more fulfilling sense of happiness, the people who had been paralyzed in the accidents were the highest. They had a different sense of meaning and happiness and value in their lives. And she had this sort of great comment about it. So the traumatic event shakes you up, and people in that situation have to grab onto positive glimmers of hope. They have to stretch themselves to find a whole new way of living, and that makes their lives more meaningful. And she is a pretty remarkable person. She has gone on to study and become a clinician. She's traveled to 40 countries. She was in Rwanda last time I talked to her, working with the survivors of the genocide there. She has a very full, challenging life. And I actually asked her if, she could go back to that day and choose whether or not to get in that car, would she do it? And I kind of felt bad. That's a pretty shitty question, right, to ask. She said, she sort of laughed, and, I kind of been thinking about that, because there was an anniversary of the accident coming up, and, she's like, I thought about that quite a bit. And she said, no, she wouldn't change anything. She said that because of that accident, she sees the world in such a different way, and in a way she never could see it otherwise, that she wouldn't change a thing, that it has led her down the path that she's on. She says, I love what I do and who I am, and I can't imagine a better life. So we'll go full circle to Happy Batman. So, he might be a little grumpy, but he's probably a little happier than some of the other superheroes. So I told you I'd end on a happy note, right? Not bad. So that's it.